21 royal doctors failed. Alien Wolf Queen's sleepless little daughter finally dozed off in human arms. The Star Palace of the Luffrey Dominion was built from black crystal and silver steel, rising like a mountain under a red sky. From the outside, it looked strong and untouchable. From the inside, it felt heavy with fear. Deep within the palace, in a quiet chamber filled with soft lights and warm air, the Wolf Queen stood beside a small resting platform. Her tall figure was wrapped in royal armor, but her shoulders were lowered, and her sharp golden eyes were tired. She was not standing there as a ruler of many systems. She was standing there as a mother. On the platform lay her youngest daughter. The child was small even for her age, her silver-gray fur thin and dull instead of thick and bright. Her ears twitched at every sound. Her claws flexed again and again, scratching lightly at the bedding. Her eyes were open, wide, and shining with fear. They never closed. Not fully, not for long. She had not slept. Not real sleep. Not the deep, healing rest that growing bodies needed. Since the moment she was born, the child had cried, shifted, and stared into the dark as if danger waited in every shadow. When exhaustion finally pulled her down, it lasted only minutes before she woke again, shaking and afraid. Each cycle left her weaker. The Wolf Queen slowly reached out and placed a clawed hand near her daughter's head. She did not touch her. Touch often made things worse. The child let out a soft whimper. The queen pulled her hand back. Behind her, the room was crowded. 21 royal doctors stood in a wide arc, each one a master of their craft. Some wore heavy medical robes filled with devices. Others carried glowing tools or floated small machines near their shoulders. A few were elders who claimed ancient knowledge passed down for generations. All of them had failed. One of the doctors stepped forward, his ears low in shame. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "we have tried every known method, neural calming fields, genetic tuning, chemical balance, psychic shielding." He hesitated before continuing. "Nothing holds." Another doctor spoke, her voice tight. "Her mind remains in constant alert mode. As if she believes she is always being hunted." "She is Luffrey," a third doctor added weakly. "Our children are born alert, it is our strength." The Wolf Queen turned slowly, her eyes flashing. "Alert is not this," she said. "This is suffering." Silence filled the chamber. The queen looked back at her daughter. The child's breathing was fast and uneven. Her small chest rose and fell like she had been running, even though she had not moved from the platform. "If this continues," the first doctor said quietly, "her body will not keep up. Growth will slow. Organs will weaken. She may—" "Enough," the queen snapped. The doctor bowed his head. Outside the chamber, whispers moved through the palace like shadows. Servants spoke softly. Guards avoided the area unless ordered. Everyone knew the truth, even if no one said it aloud. The Wolf Queen, feared by enemies and respected by allies, could not protect her own child. That same day, a small human trade vessel arrived at the edge of Luffrey space. The humans had requested permission to dock weeks earlier. They were traders and long-range travelers, moving between systems with goods, stories, and simple technology. Normally, such a request would have been delayed or denied. Humans were considered weak by Luffrey standards. Soft bodies, dull senses, short claws, but the Dominion was hosting a diplomatic season, and refusing visitors without cause could be seen as insult. So the humans were allowed to land. They were escorted through the palace halls, their footsteps echoing against the polished floors. They stared openly at the towering architecture and the tall wolf-like guards. A few guards smirked, amused by how small the humans looked. One of the humans, a man with dark hair and calm eyes, walked quietly at the back of the group. He did not speak much. He observed. As the group passed near the medical wing, a sharp, thin cry echoed through the hall. The human slowed. It was not loud, but it carried something that made his chest tighten. It was not anger. It was not pain alone. It was fear. The human stopped walking. A guard noticed. "Keep moving," the guard growled. The human hesitated, then nodded and continued. But his head turned slightly toward the sound until it faded behind thick doors. Later, during a formal waiting period, the humans were seated in a large chamber with food and drink they barely touched. They were told to wait while palace officials prepared their audience. Time passed. Then unexpectedly a high-ranking attendant entered the room. Her expression was sharp and tired. "One of you," she said, scanning the humans, "noticed something earlier." The humans exchanged confused looks. The attendant's gaze settled on the quiet man at the back. "You paused near the medical wing." The man stood slowly. "Yes," he said. His voice was gentle. "I heard a child crying." The attendant's ears flicked. "That area is restricted." "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't mean offense." She studied him for a long moment, then turned sharply. "Come with me." The other humans started to protest, but the guard raised a hand. "Remain seated." The man followed the attendant through twisting corridors, deeper into the palace than any human had been allowed before. The air grew warmer, the lights softer. They stopped outside a guarded door. Inside, the Wolf Queen stood alone now. The doctors had been dismissed. She needed silence. The door opened. The Queen turned, her eyes narrowing when she saw the human. "This is a mistake," she said coldly. The attendant bowed. "Your Majesty," he heard the child. He reacted. The Queen looked back at the platform. Her daughter was restless again, claws scraping softly. "What does a human know of Luffery children?" the Queen asked. "Nothing," the man said honestly. The Queen's eyes snapped back to him. "Then why are you here?" The man swallowed. He did not look at the Queen. He looked at the child carefully, respectfully. "Because," he said, "that sound, it was not just noise. I've heard it before." The Queen crossed the room in 2 long strides and stood directly in front of him. She towered over him, her presence heavy with restrained power. "Explain." "In my species," he said, choosing his words slowly, "when a child cries like that, it means they don't feel safe. Not in danger, just not safe enough to rest." One of the guards growled softly. The Queen raised a hand, stopping him. "You think my daughter is unsafe?" the Queen asked. "No," the man said quickly. "I think she feels like she has to stay awake to survive." The Queen did not speak. "She doesn't need fixing," he continued. "She needs permission to sleep." The room was silent except for the child's uneven breathing. The Queen laughed once, short and bitter. "21 of my best healers failed," she said, "and you think words will succeed." "I don't know if I can help," the man said, "but I know force won't." The Queen stared at her daughter. Then slowly she stepped aside. "You have 5 minutes," she said. "You will not touch her without permission." The man nodded. He approached the platform slowly, making no sudden movements. He sat on the floor beside it, lowering himself to the child's level. The child noticed him immediately. Her eyes locked onto his face. Her body stiffened. The man did nothing. He did not reach out. He did not speak loudly. He simply sat and breathed, slow and steady. After a moment he began to hum. It was quiet, almost too soft to hear. A simple sound without words. The child's claws stopped moving. Her ears twitched, then slowly lowered. The Wolf Queen held her breath. The child's breathing began to change. Slower, deeper. Minutes passed. For the first time since her birth, the Wolf Queen watched her daughter's eyes close and stay closed. The room seemed to stop. The child slept. And in that silence, the fate of how the galaxy would see humanity began to change. The chamber was still, save for the quiet rhythm of the child's breathing. The Wolf Queen stood frozen, her golden eyes wide with disbelief. Every muscle in her body tensed as she watched the silver-furred little figure finally resting peacefully. She could not understand it. None of her 21 trusted doctors had achieved this. None of the most advanced machines, the glowing devices, or psychic shields had even brought her daughter close to calm. Yet here was a human, a species she had always considered fragile and weak, sitting quietly, humbly, and accomplishing what all her experts had failed to do. The man did not move. He remained seated on the floor, his back straight, his gaze soft and steady. He did not make sudden movements. He did not speak. He simply allowed the child to exist in his presence without interference. The queen's daughter, sensing this, continued to relax. Her ears lowered slightly, a sign of trust in her species. Her small claws flexed less frequently. Her chest rose and fell at a steady pace. And most importantly, she remained asleep. The queen's advisors whispered among themselves, uncertain if they should interrupt or if they should remain silent. Their confusion grew with every passing second. In all their years of studying Luffery development, they had never seen anything like this. The human's approach was so simple yet so powerful. There was no advanced technology, no complex formula. There was only presence, calm, and patience. Finally, the Wolf Queen broke the silence. "Explain yourself," she commanded, her voice echoing in the high-ceilinged room. "What are you doing that none of my best minds could achieve?" The human looked up at her briefly. His eyes were calm, unshaken by the authority or the intimidation that radiated from the queen. "I am not doing anything to her," he said softly. "I am letting her do what her mind is telling her she cannot. She does not need a cure. She needs to feel safe enough to rest." The queen's ears twitched, her instincts clashing with her curiosity. "Safe," she repeated, incredulous. "You mean to tell me that my daughter, who has lived her whole life in this palace with the protection of the Dominion, feels unsafe?" "Yes," the man replied. "I do not know why she feels it, but she does, and she will not sleep until she trusts that she is secure. Not your machines, not your potions, not your psychic shields, only that she is safe enough to let go." The queen considered this. Her child was Luffery, strong, resilient, born to survive. And yet here was a human, who had never encountered their kind before, teaching her something she had not understood herself. Her mind raced, reviewing every failed attempt by her doctors, every method they had applied to soothe her daughter, and realizing that perhaps their knowledge had limits. One of the royal doctors stepped forward cautiously. "Your Majesty," he said, perhaps this human is onto something. We have relied on methods that force the child into rest, but never on understanding her instincts. Maybe what he says has merit." The queen's golden eyes snapped toward him. "Merit," she hissed. "Our species does not need merit in theory. We need results. Do not suggest that our knowledge is insufficient." I only mean to observe, Your Majesty," the doctor replied carefully, bowing slightly. "Perhaps the child needs more than physical intervention. Perhaps there is a psychological element." The queen turned her attention back to her daughter. She had never thought of her child's sleeplessness as psychological. Luffery children were alert by nature, always aware, always prepared. Sleep was a tool to restore strength, but the mind was conditioned to remain vigilant. Perhaps, for her daughter, that conditioning had gone too far. Perhaps the human's difference in approach, their trust and emotional intelligence, was exactly what her daughter needed. The human remained silent, continuing to sit near the child, letting her rest without interference. It was an approach so simple that it almost seemed illogical, yet the results were undeniable. The child's breathing remained steady, her small body relaxed for the first time in years, and her eyelids stayed closed as though she had forgotten how to open them. The queen stepped closer, her curiosity now mingled with awe. She crouched near the platform, bringing her eyes level with the child. Her voice softened, an unfamiliar warmth threading through the stern tone. "Child," she whispered, "are you finally at peace?" The child shifted slightly in her sleep but did not wake. Her tiny paws flexed once before settling again. The queen's heart ached, both from relief and from a deep, lingering guilt. She had spent countless nights worrying, watching, planning, and even punishing herself for the inability to soothe her daughter. All the tools, all the techniques, all the rules of their species had failed. And now, a human, a fragile being compared to the might of the Luffery, had succeeded simply by being calm and present. The chamber remained quiet for several minutes. The other humans, who had been left behind in the outer hall, were eventually allowed to observe from a respectful distance. They watched in amazement as the child, once frantic and sleepless, rested peacefully in the alien palace that had been her prison of anxiety. They whispered among themselves, noting the contrast between their own experiences with children on their homeworld and the extreme vigilance of the Wolf Queen's daughter. The Queen finally broke the silence once more. "Tell me," she said to the human, her voice firm yet tinged with curiosity, "what is it about humans that allows you to accomplish this? Why can you soothe what all my knowledge has failed to control?" The man looked at her, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Our species survives in part by understanding when danger is real and when it is not. We teach our children to recognize safety and to trust those who care for them. It is not power that calms a child. It is trust, patience, and presence." The Queen's ears twitched. "Trust," she repeated slowly. "You mean to suggest that my daughter is not lacking strength, she lacks trust." "Yes," the human said gently. "She cannot rest because she cannot trust that she is safe. She has never been forced to trust, and she will not sleep until she feels it." The Queen considered this, her mind racing through the history of her family, the palace, and the long line of Luffery rulers. She realized that her daughter's constant vigilance was not a flaw but a trait amplified beyond necessity. It was not weakness. It was the burden of instinct untempered by reassurance. Perhaps the human's approach, soft, gentle, and patient, was something her people had forgotten in their pursuit of strength and survival. One of the junior doctors, emboldened by the unfolding events, stepped forward again. "Your Majesty," he said quietly, "perhaps we should study this approach. It is different, yes, but it works. Maybe there is something to learn from humans after all." The Queen turned her piercing eyes toward him. "Study," she said carefully. "Do not interfere, observe, learn, but remember this is not surrender, this is understanding." The human shifted slightly, his movements slow and deliberate. He placed one hand gently near the child's head, not touching, just offering a sense of presence. The child stirred slightly in response but did not wake. Her breathing continued its steady rhythm, and her small paws relaxed further. It was as if she could sense the difference between being observed with expectation and being supported with patience. Minutes stretched into an hour. The palace staff, the royal doctors, and the Wolf Queen herself watched in silent awe. The child remained asleep, finally finding the peace that had eluded her for years. The human did not speak. He did not try to manipulate or control. He simply existed in the moment, providing the security and reassurance that the child's instinct demanded. Eventually, the Queen stepped closer and lowered herself to sit beside the human. She did not touch her daughter. She did not interfere. Instead, she allowed herself to witness the quiet miracle unfolding before her eyes. The child, her daughter, slept, not because of power or authority, but because someone had allowed her to feel safe. The Queen's mind was racing. She realized that her entire perception of strength and care had been challenged. Perhaps the galaxy underestimated humans not because of weakness, but because their strength was of a different kind. Perhaps the most powerful force was not claws, teeth, or psychic ability, but the ability to offer calm, presence, and trust. As the child continued to rest, the Queen made a silent vow. She would not forget this lesson. She would not dismiss the humans again. And most importantly, she would protect the quiet, subtle strengths that her people had long ignored in favor of force. When the child finally shifted slightly, stretching in a relaxed manner, the Queen's golden eyes softened. "You have done what none of us could," she whispered to the human. "And in doing so, you have taught me something I will never forget." The human nodded slightly, acknowledging the Queen without pride. "I only followed what I knew," he said quietly. "She needed to feel safe. That was all." The Wolf Queen's heart ached with a mixture of relief, gratitude, and something new, humility. She realized that the galaxy was larger, stranger, and more interconnected than she had imagined. Humans, whom she had once dismissed, could teach her a lesson that 21 doctors, advanced technologies, and centuries of Luffery knowledge could not. As the sun of the distant system began to dip below the horizon, casting long red shadows across the crystal floors of the palace, the Wolf Queen finally exhaled. Her daughter slept, the human remained near, and the room was filled with a calm that had not existed in the palace for years. It was the beginning of a quiet revolution, a realization that sometimes strength was not in domination or control, but in the simple act of being present for another. The child slept through the rest of the evening. The palace, usually filled with strict routines, buzzed quietly with disbelief. The royal doctors took careful notes, trying to understand the human approach. Servants whispered stories about the calm, small creature who had tamed the restless child. And the queen, once feared across many worlds, felt something she had not felt in a long time: hope. She watched her daughter for a long while, feeling a bond strengthen in ways that rules, protocols, and authority could never create. And she understood, finally, that the galaxy was changing, not through conquest, but through simple acts of care, patience, and understanding. The human, sitting quietly on the floor, remained an unassuming figure, unaware of the ripple he had created across the palace and perhaps the entire dominion. The Wolf Queen made a decision. This human would not leave unnoticed. His presence was a lesson that her people needed to learn, and as she turned to look at him, she knew that she would protect him as fiercely as she protected her child. The first step of an unprecedented alliance had begun. Humanity, so often underestimated, was quietly making its mark on the galaxy. And in a small chamber of the Luffery Palace, a little silver-furred child finally slept, cradled not by power, but by presence, patience, and trust. The next morning, the Wolf Queen awoke early, as was her custom, yet her mind was restless despite the dawn light spilling across the black crystal floors of her palace. Her daughter, the small silver-furred child, still slept quietly on the raised platform, her breathing steady and calm. The queen had barely slept herself, not out of duty, but out of curiosity and wonder. She could not stop thinking about what had happened the previous day. 21 of her most skilled doctors had failed. Machines, spells, psychic shields, and the greatest knowledge her species possessed, all had been useless. Yet one human, a fragile, small, and seemingly ordinary being, had achieved what none of them could. She moved quietly through the chamber to stand near the human, who had remained seated near the platform all night, unmoving, observing the child. He looked up as she approached, his calm presence unshaken. "You have kept watch through the night," the queen said, her voice low, almost reverent. "Why?" The human shook his head slightly. "I could not leave. She needed continuity. Even in sleep, a child can sense absence. It may have startled her awake." The queen studied him closely. There was no pride, no arrogance in his words, just a simple honesty that she had not encountered often in her people or in her own kind. The Wolf Queen realized that this honesty, combined with patience, had created something her species rarely experienced: trust. The child stirred slightly, stretching her small limbs, flexing her tiny paws, and letting out a soft sigh. Her ears twitched, but she did not open her eyes. The human's hand hovered close, steady, reassuring. The queen's chest tightened. She realized, as she watched her daughter rest so naturally, that she had never truly understood the mind of her child. Not fully, not in the way that humans did. She turned to her advisors and doctors, who had been called in for observation. They watched silently from the side of the chamber, each of them unsure how to act. The human's approach had left them speechless. "Observe carefully," the queen said, her voice commanding but gentle. "You will record every detail, every subtle change." Perhaps this is a lesson our people need to learn. One of the younger doctors, a female with silver-tipped ears and soft blue eyes, finally spoke. "Your Majesty, may I?" She gestured toward the human. "May we try to understand how he does this?" The queen nodded slightly. "Observe, but do not touch, do not interfere, learn first." The human turned slightly to the young doctor. "It is not complicated," he said. "It is not magic or technology. It is presence, patience, and calm. That is all. She needs to feel safe, not forced. And that cannot be achieved by machines or spells." The young doctor frowned. "But she is Luffery. Luffery children are always alert, always aware. We cannot simply remove instincts." The human shook his head gently. "I do not remove anything. I only allow her to trust that she can let go. She is not weak, she is strong. But strength alone is not enough for rest. Trust is required." The queen's golden eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Her daughter had always been alert, every twitch of her ears and every flick of her tail a sign of instinctive vigilance. That vigilance had once been celebrated as a mark of survival, but now she realized it had become a burden. She had not considered that her own child might need something different than her ancestors had experienced. The child shifted again, her small head turning slightly toward the human. Her breathing remained calm, and her body relaxed further. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet the queen noticed. She took a slow, steady breath herself, as if aligning with the rhythm of her daughter's sleep. "We have been blind," she said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. "We relied on instinct and knowledge, but we ignored what it means to feel secure. Perhaps humans understand something we have forgotten." A murmur spread through the group of doctors. One of the eldest, a tall figure with fur streaked in gray, spoke cautiously. "Your Majesty, humans are fragile. They do not have our strength, our senses, our speed. How could they possibly know what it means to raise a Luffery child?" "They know it because they rely on a different kind of strength," the queen replied. "A strength that does not rely on force or instinct. Perhaps that is why this child can finally rest." The human remained calm, but he allowed a small smile as he watched the doctors absorb the queen's words. He knew that his species was often underestimated, yet it was this very underestimation that allowed him to act without fear or expectation. The child's ears twitched once, then lowered further. Her small paws flexed, and her tail moved slightly in a slow, contented rhythm. The queen realized that the child had begun a cycle of sleep that might last for hours, something no Luffery child of her age had ever done without intervention. The queen stepped closer, lowering herself to sit beside the platform. She did not touch her daughter, but she placed her eyes at the child's level, observing. The human's calm presence seemed to extend, as if creating an invisible shield of safety around the child. "Tell me," the queen asked the human, "how did you know what to do? What made you different from all others who tried and failed?" The human paused, considering his words. "I have seen children who cannot sleep before. Not Luffery children, not any other kind. Humans, we learn from our young that they need presence, not force. That is all I know." I did not think, I just sat and let her be. The queen absorbed this in silence. She had always believed that knowledge, control, and authority were the greatest tools of a ruler. Yet here was evidence that another kind of wisdom existed, one not built on dominance or power, but on understanding and patience. Minutes passed. The child slept peacefully, her small chest rising and falling in a smooth rhythm. The room remained quiet, the usual palace bustle replaced by a rare stillness. The queen finally allowed herself to exhale, a long, slow release of tension she had not realized she carried. One of the doctors stepped closer to the human, curiosity overtaking fear. "If you do not mind me asking," she said quietly, "can you teach us? Can we learn this method?" The human nodded slowly. "You can observe, you can note her reactions, but it cannot be taught like a formula or a spell. It is patience, attention, and willingness to be calm with her. The rest comes from her." The queen's eyes glimmered. "Then you shall stay. You shall remain here as long as the child sleeps and as long as she learns to trust, not as a servant, not as a guest, but as a teacher." The human inclined his head slightly, understanding the gravity of her words. He had not come seeking honor or position, yet he realized the queen had entrusted him with something far more important: the well-being of the child and, indirectly, a lesson for an entire civilization. As the day progressed, the child remained asleep for hours. Even the most restless palace staff found themselves watching quietly, hesitant to disturb the fragile peace. The Wolf Queen noted every twitch of her daughter's ears, every subtle movement of her paws, and the rise and fall of her chest. She realized that the child was not just resting, she was learning to feel secure. By midday, the queen summoned the royal doctors to observe. She did not scold them or demand explanations. She simply asked them to watch, to see what had succeeded where all other methods had failed. The human demonstrated nothing beyond what he had already done. He sat calmly, close enough to be present but far enough not to interfere. He maintained slow, steady breathing, and his eyes were soft, attentive but not intrusive. That was all. The queen's advisors struggled to comprehend it. They had spent their lives relying on precision, calculation, and power. Yet here was proof that a different kind of wisdom existed, and it had worked. Finally, the child stirred again, her tiny head lifting slightly. She opened her eyes just enough to blink slowly at the human. He smiled gently, not moving his hands, not speaking. The child twitched her ears, then relaxed again. She turned slightly, curling closer to the platform, and resumed sleeping. The queen's heart swelled. She had expected this to be temporary, a fleeting moment of rest. Yet the child's trust seemed genuine. She realized that the bond between the human and her daughter had formed something stronger than she had anticipated. That evening, the queen called a private council. The 21 royal doctors were present, along with the human and a few trusted advisors. She spoke with a quiet authority that commanded attention. "You have all failed to see what is most important," she said. "Our knowledge, our strength, our history, these are tools, yes, but they are not everything. The child's need was not for intervention, but for presence. Trust is as vital as instinct. Safety is as important as strength." The council remained silent, absorbing the weight of her words. It was unusual for the queen to speak in such a reflective, personal way, and even more unusual for her to recognize a human's contribution openly. The human remained seated, listening quietly. He understood that he had done nothing extraordinary, yet he also understood that the impact of his presence could not be overstated. The queen continued, "Let this be a lesson, not just for the care of my child, but for all who rule. Strength without understanding is incomplete, knowledge without patience is incomplete, and power without compassion is empty." One of the elder doctors, usually stern and inflexible, bowed his head. "Your Majesty, we understand. We will study this approach. We will observe and learn. Perhaps humans hold wisdom we have overlooked." The queen nodded. "Then begin. Observe carefully. Learn not only for the child, but for the future of our people." The child, still sleeping, stretched slightly, then curled again. The human remained at her side, unwavering. The queen's gaze softened as she watched the quiet scene. She realized that the galaxy was larger, more diverse, and more complex than she had ever considered. Humans, once dismissed as fragile and weak, had demonstrated a strength of a different kind, one that her people had long ignored. As the sun set beyond the crystal walls of the palace, casting long red and gold shadows across the chamber, the queen felt a sense of hope. For the first time in her life, she understood that there were forces in the galaxy more powerful than instinct, more enduring than machinery, and more influential than authority. The simple act of being present, of offering calm and trust, could change lives in ways that nothing else could. The child continued to sleep through the night, a small silver bundle of fur, breathing steadily and peacefully. The human stayed by her side, as he had promised, maintaining the quiet presence that had restored what 21 doctors could not. And the Wolf Queen, watching over them both, understood that the future of her daughter, and perhaps her people, was forever changed by this quiet, unassuming being from another world. The galaxy would soon learn that humanity's greatest strength was not in weapons, nor in speed, nor in power. It was in the ability to make others feel safe. It was in the patience to allow trust to grow. It was in the quiet, enduring presence that could soothe even the most vigilant mind. And in the heart of the Luffery Palace, this truth was being proven, one small, silver-furred child at a time. The day after the child had finally slept peacefully, the palace was alive with a quiet tension. News of the small human success spread quickly among the staff and the royal advisors, and whispers filled the halls. It seemed impossible that a human, fragile and soft by Luffery standards, could achieve what 21 of the most skilled doctors in the Dominion had failed to do. Even the most skeptical guards and nobles could not deny it. Some were impressed, others were reluctant to acknowledge the truth. The Wolf Queen moved through the palace corridors, her golden eyes sharp and reflective. Her daughter, the small silver-furred child, remained asleep in the care of the human. The queen had ordered that he remain near the child as long as needed, not as a servant, but as a teacher. She understood that his approach was simple, yet revolutionary. Presence, patience, trust. These were concepts that had existed in her people for centuries, but they had been forgotten in favor of power, speed, and vigilance. In the council chamber, the human sat quietly, observing but not participating in the political discussions. The queen had summoned the senior nobles and advisors, and a tension filled the room that had not existed before. Many of them were angry, some embarrassed, and others curious. How could the Dominion have underestimated a human so completely? How could one small creature succeed where centuries of Luffery knowledge had failed? One of the senior advisors, his fur graying with age, finally spoke. "Your Majesty," he began carefully, "I do not understand. How is it possible that a human, a being without our instincts, without our strength, could achieve what your best doctors could not? Surely this is coincidence." The queen's golden eyes glimmered as she leaned forward. "It is not coincidence," she said firmly. "It is understanding. This human saw what we could not. He did not try to force or control. He allowed my daughter to trust, to feel safe. That is what enabled her to rest. That is what enabled her to sleep." Another advisor, younger and more defiant, snorted. "Your Majesty, with respect, he is a human. We have seen their kind. They are weak. How can we rely on them? How can we grant one of them status in our court?" The queen's gaze turned sharp. "You have all relied on knowledge without understanding. You have all relied on power without patience. And yet you call this being weak. Weakness is not in presence. Weakness is in failing to see what must be done." Murmurs rippled through the room. The nobles and advisors exchanged uneasy glances. The queen's words carried authority, but they also challenged centuries of tradition. Some were afraid, some curious, and others resistant to change. One of the junior doctors, the same one who had observed the human the previous day, spoke hesitantly. "Your Majesty, perhaps we can study his methods. Perhaps we can learn how to care for the child without relying solely on instinct or intervention. Perhaps," she paused, uncertain, "perhaps humans do possess qualities we have overlooked." The queen nodded slightly, her expression thoughtful. "You will study, you will observe, you will not interfere, but you will learn." The council chamber remained tense as discussions continued, but the human did not participate. He remained seated quietly, calm, patient, observing the child through a small window that allowed him to monitor her sleep. He understood the politics of the palace, but he knew his role was not to argue or to prove himself. His role was to be present, to allow the child to trust, and to demonstrate through action, not words, what care truly meant. Later that day, a group of nobles approached the queen privately. Their expressions were a mixture of fear, confusion, and indignation. "Your Majesty," one of them began, "we cannot allow a human to hold such influence over the royal family. It undermines our traditions, our authority, our power. We must act." The queen's ears twitched sharply. "And what would you suggest?" she asked, her voice low and dangerous. "Shall we remove the one who has saved my child? Shall we dismiss what we cannot understand simply because it challenges our pride?" The nobles faltered. They had expected compliance, but the queen's eyes left no room for argument. "This human remains in my protection," she continued. "He is not a subject, he is not a servant. He is here because he possesses a strength that none of you can claim. He has earned my respect, and as long as I rule, he will not be harmed." A silence followed her words. The nobles understood the seriousness of her declaration. To challenge the queen now would be to challenge the very foundation of the dominion. Some bowed their heads, others shifted uncomfortably, but none spoke further. Meanwhile, the child began to wake slowly from her sleep. She blinked her small silver eyes and looked toward the human. He smiled gently, maintaining the calm presence that had guided her through the night. The child reached out a tiny paw, not in fear but in recognition. The human extended his hand carefully, and she curled her fingers around it, a small gesture of trust and connection. The queen watched silently, her heart swelling with a mixture of relief and admiration. She realized that the bond forming between her daughter and the human was more than a simple act of care. It was a demonstration of understanding, patience, and trust that transcended species. Word of the human's success spread beyond the palace. Envoys from neighboring systems arrived, curious to see the child and the human who had calmed her. Some came with skepticism, others with fascination. The human remained humble, observing quietly, speaking only when necessary. Each visitor left with a growing awareness of the unique qualities humans possessed, qualities that were subtle, powerful, and difficult to measure by conventional standards. The queen began to see the broader implications. Humans, long underestimated and dismissed, could teach her people lessons in patience, empathy, and trust. Their approach to care, their ability to foster confidence and security, was a kind of strength the Luffery had forgotten. She began to wonder if her people could learn from humans, not just in caring for children, but in diplomacy, in understanding, in the delicate balance between power and trust. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long red shadows across the palace floors, the queen convened another council. This time, the discussion was not about power or territory. It was about learning, observation, and understanding. She spoke of the human, not as a subject or a visitor, but as a teacher. She described the importance of presence, patience, and calm in fostering trust and security. The nobles listened, some with reluctance, some with genuine curiosity. The queen's words were firm but inspiring. She challenged them to consider the value of understanding and empathy, not as weaknesses, but as strengths that could strengthen the dominion in ways that force alone could not. As the council concluded, the child slept quietly nearby, the human remaining at her side. The queen felt a sense of hope and purpose she had not felt in years. She knew that this experience would change her people, her family, and the way the Luffery viewed other species. The quiet, patient strength of the human had proven that the galaxy was larger, more complex, and more interconnected than they had realized. In the following days, the queen observed the child's progress. She noticed small changes. The child's ears twitched less, her claws flexed less frequently, and her breathing remained steady even during moments of activity. The human continued his quiet vigil, offering presence and calm without interference. The queen realized that this simple, patient approach was creating lasting change. The palace began to adapt. Doctors observed rather than dictated. Guards learned to step back and allow calm to prevail. Even the queen herself adjusted, taking moments to sit quietly with her daughter, learning from the human's example. The child thrived under this new environment, growing stronger, healthier, and more confident. Word of the child's recovery and the human's methods reached other systems. Diplomats, traders, and even rival civilizations began to take note. Humanity, long underestimated and dismissed as weak, was beginning to earn a quiet but growing respect. The Wolf Queen recognized that the galaxy's perception of humans was changing, and that this small, unassuming being had sparked a movement that could influence countless worlds. The Queen made a decision. She formally granted the human a title of honor within the palace. He would be recognized not for power or status, but for his understanding, patience, and ability to teach. This decision shocked many nobles, but none could argue with the results. The child was thriving, and the methods were undeniable. As the human accepted this new role, he remained humble. He understood that his work was not about recognition, but about the child's well-being. The queen, however, saw the significance of his presence. He was more than a teacher. He was a bridge between species, a living example of the quiet, enduring strength that humans could bring to the galaxy. The child, now fully awake, looked at the human and reached out her small paw. He smiled and she curled her fingers around his hand. The queen watched, tears of relief and pride in her eyes. Her daughter was not just resting. She was thriving, learning to trust, and forming a bond that would shape her future. The galaxy, the queen realized, would soon learn an important lesson. Strength was not only measured in power, speed, or claws. True strength could be found in patience, empathy, understanding, and the quiet presence that allowed others to feel safe. Humans, once dismissed as weak, had shown the dominion, and perhaps the galaxy, a new kind of power. The palace grew quieter in the following days, but the changes were evident. Doctors, guards, and advisors adapted their methods. The queen continued to observe her daughter and the human, learning from their interactions. Each day, the child grew stronger, healthier, and more confident. Each day, the human's quiet presence reminded the queen of the power of trust and patience. Even rival nobles who had initially opposed the human's presence began to see the value in his methods. They witnessed the child's progress, observed the calm that now filled the palace, and could not deny the results. Slowly, they began to adopt similar practices in their own duties, learning to value presence and patience over force and authority. By the end of the week, the child's transformation was undeniable. She played, laughed, and explored her surroundings with a newfound sense of security. The human remained near, offering guidance and calm, but allowing her independence to grow. The queen watched, realizing that this small, quiet being had changed not only her child's life, but the culture of her palace and perhaps the dominion itself. The galaxy was watching, whether it knew it or not. Humanity's strength, quiet and unassuming, was beginning to ripple outward, teaching civilizations across the stars that trust, patience, and empathy were powerful tools, sometimes more powerful than weapons, speed, or raw instinct. And in the heart of the Luffery Palace, a little silver-furred child thrived under the care of a human who understood the true meaning of strength. The Wolf Queen, once a ruler defined by fear and power, learned that leadership also required understanding, empathy, and the courage to recognize strength where others might dismiss it. The morning sunlight poured into the palace chamber, catching the edges of black crystal and silver steel, painting the floors with warm golden light. The small silver-furred child had awakened fully now. She stretched her tiny limbs, her ears twitching with a newfound energy, and her golden eyes looked around the room with alert curiosity. For the first time in her life, she did not immediately look for danger. She did not flinch at every shadow. She did not tremble at every sound. She had slept through the night, fully and deeply, and she had woken feeling safe. The human remained near her side, seated quietly as always. He had not moved during her sleep, had not interrupted or tried to control her rest. His calm presence had created an environment in which the child could feel secure. She had learned to trust him, and in that trust, she had found the strength to grow. The Wolf Queen stood a few paces away, watching her daughter and the human interact. She felt a mixture of pride, relief, and something entirely new. Awe. For all her experience as a ruler, she had never witnessed a feat like this. A human weak by Luffery standards, soft by their measures of strength, had done what all her best healers and advisors could not. And in doing so, he had changed the way she saw the world. The child toddled toward the human, small paws moving carefully on the smooth floor. She reached up, placing her tiny hands on his arm, and looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and affection. The human bent slightly to meet her gaze, offering a gentle smile. She giggled softly, a sound that filled the chamber with warmth. The Wolf Queen's eyes glimmered as she witnessed this simple, tender moment. "Do you see, Mother?" the human said softly, though not to the child but to the Queen. "She is learning, she is safe. She can trust. That is what allows growth, health, and strength to flourish." The Queen nodded slowly. "I see it," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I understand it now. I have spent centuries relying on instinct, power, and knowledge, but I had forgotten the simplest strength of all, the strength to allow trust." The child began to play gently, picking up small objects placed around the chamber. She experimented with them carefully, examining their texture and weight. The human observed without interference, offering quiet guidance when necessary. He did not correct her. He did not dictate her actions, but he was there if she needed reassurance. The Wolf Queen watched the scene, realizing that this was more than care. It was education, guidance, and protection all woven into one. Word of the child's recovery had already begun to spread throughout the palace and beyond. Other nobles, initially skeptical and even resistant, had observed the child's progress and were quietly reconsidering their assumptions about humans. Envoys from nearby systems had arrived, eager to witness the phenomenon themselves. Each visitor was met with a calm, confident demonstration of the human's presence-based approach, and each left with a growing respect for what had been achieved. The Queen convened another council, this time with more than just her closest advisors. Several nobles, doctors, and even visiting dignitaries attended. The chamber was filled with anticipation and quiet curiosity. For the first time, the discussion was not about power, diplomacy, or territory. It was about understanding, care, and a new kind of strength. "Observe carefully," the Queen instructed. "You will learn not only from what has been done, but from how it has been done. This human is teaching us something we have overlooked. His methods are simple, but their impact is profound. Watch and learn." The human remained seated at the edge of the room, calm and unobtrusive. He did not seek recognition, nor did he assert authority. He simply allowed the observers to witness the child's natural curiosity and confidence, the result of feeling safe and understood. The child toddled across the chamber, her eyes bright with excitement. She reached for a small wooden sphere placed on a low table and examined it carefully. She held it close to her face, rolling it between her small paws, then placed it back gently. Each movement was deliberate and confident, a testament to the security she now felt. A young noble, clearly astonished, whispered to an advisor nearby, "I have never seen a Luffery child behave like this. Normally they are restless, alert, even fearful. She is thriving." "Yes," the advisor replied quietly, "and it is because of the human. He has created an environment where trust allows strength to manifest. Our methods alone could not achieve this." The Queen's gaze swept across the room, her golden eyes sharp yet filled with thought. "Let this be a lesson," she said. "Strength is not measured only by power or instinct. It is measured by understanding, by patience, and by the ability to allow others to feel secure. Humans possess this strength in ways we have long underestimated. As the council continued, the child's progress was evident to all. She moved with confidence, explored her surroundings, and interacted with her environment in ways that had once been impossible. The palace staff, who had once whispered doubts and criticisms, now watched quietly with admiration. Even the senior doctors, initially skeptical, observed in awe as the child's development unfolded. Outside the palace, the story began to spread through the Luffery Dominion and beyond. Traders, diplomats, and travelers carried the tale to distant systems. The reputation of humanity began to shift. Once dismissed as weak, fragile, and insignificant, humans were now recognized as a species capable of subtle, powerful influence. Their strength was not in speed, claws, or psychic ability, but in their patience, presence, and capacity to foster trust. The Wolf Queen took a moment to reflect on the broader implications. She realized that the child's transformation was not merely a personal victory, but a symbol of a larger truth. The galaxy was vast, complex, and filled with diverse species. Strength alone would not ensure survival or success. Understanding, empathy, and trust were equally vital, and humans, she now saw, could teach her people lessons that no machine, weapon, or spell could. One afternoon, as the child played with small toys arranged carefully around the chamber, the queen approached the human. "Your work here is complete in some ways," she said softly, "but its influence extends far beyond this chamber. You have changed my child. You have changed my court. You have challenged our assumptions. For that I am grateful." The human inclined his head humbly. "I did only what I could. She needed to feel safe. That was all. The rest belongs to her." The queen nodded, understanding the truth in his words. It was not about power or recognition. It was about presence, trust, and patience. These were the qualities that had allowed her daughter to thrive, and they were the qualities that would ripple across the Dominion and the galaxy beyond. In the days that followed, the child's development continued to accelerate. She learned to explore, to interact, and to communicate with confidence. The human remained by her side, offering guidance without interference, presence without pressure. The Wolf Queen observed every interaction, absorbing the lessons silently. She began to implement these methods across the palace, encouraging doctors, guards, and staff to adopt presence-based care rather than relying solely on force, instinct, or authority. Visitors continued to arrive, curious to witness the child's growth. Each left with the same impression. Humanity's strength was quiet, enduring, and often underestimated. It was the ability to allow others to feel safe, to trust, and to grow. The Wolf Queen realized that this insight could transform not only her own people, but the galaxy as a whole. One evening, as the sun set beyond the horizon, casting long red and gold shadows across the palace floors, the queen stood beside the child and the human. The little silver-furred girl leaned against the human, her small body relaxed and content. She looked up at him, eyes shining with trust and affection, and he smiled gently in return. "You have done more than calm a child," the queen said softly. "You have shown us a way to grow stronger by being gentle, by trusting, by allowing others to feel secure. That is a lesson our people will carry forward." The human shook his head slightly. "It was her strength, not mine. She had it all along. I only helped her find it by letting her feel safe." The queen's golden eyes glimmered with understanding. "Then it is a gift you have shared, and one that will echo across the Dominion. Humanity's quiet power has changed us all." In the following weeks, the child continued to thrive, exploring her palace, learning from those around her, and playing with confidence and curiosity. The human remained a constant presence, patient and calm, offering guidance and reassurance when needed. The Wolf Queen's court adapted to this new understanding, embracing the value of presence, patience, and trust. Across the galaxy, the reputation of humans grew quietly but steadily. They were no longer dismissed as weak or insignificant. They were recognized for their ability to create trust, to foster understanding, and to inspire growth without force. Their influence spread, subtle but powerful, reshaping perceptions and relationships among countless civilizations. The Wolf Queen watched her daughter one final time that evening, the small silver-furred child asleep peacefully in the human's arms. She realized that the galaxy had changed in ways she could never have predicted. Humans, fragile and unassuming, had demonstrated a power that surpassed weaponry, speed, and instinct. They had shown that true strength lay not in domination, but in the quiet, enduring ability to make others feel safe. The queen took a deep breath and allowed herself to smile. Her daughter slept peacefully. The human remained at her side, a silent guardian and teacher, and the galaxy, slowly but surely, was beginning to understand the quiet, profound strength of humanity. The Wolf Queen knew that this was only the beginning. The child would grow strong, healthy, and confident. Humanity's example would inspire countless others. And the lesson was clear. True power could be found in patience, trust, and the simple, enduring presence of one being willing to care. The palace was quiet now, filled with a calm that had once seemed impossible. Outside, the stars shone across the vast reaches of the galaxy, indifferent yet witness to the change that had begun. The little silver-furred child slept soundly. The human held her gently, and the Wolf Queen understood that the galaxy's future had been quietly, irrevocably altered by an unassuming human who had shown the power of trust, patience, and understanding. And in that moment, humanity's quiet, enduring strength had proven itself across the stars.